Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde, bonjour Nidwe Maganadok. My name is Sean Meades and I'm currently a lecturer with the Department of Community, Economic and Social Development at Algoma University. And I'd like to express my solidarity and support for all of our colleagues at Laurentian and the Federated Universities, and also to all the students impacted by this disaster. You've all had your lives turned upside down thanks to the prolonged stretches of incompetent management by the university's Board of Governors and senior management that went unchallenged by an incompetent minister. There are many reasons and layers to the story of how Laurentian University came to this crisis that it faces today, and all of you watching are likely far more capable to speak to them. But as someone who teaches in community development, one of the major systemic failures that I saw was apparent in the failure to pursue proper community engagement, not only during the height of the crisis, where the uses of the CCAA shrouded the restructuring in secrecy, but long before then as well. So for the benefit of Laurentian's management, I thought it may be worthwhile to share some advice using this adapted introductory lectures uh, uh, on the basics of community engagement. So let's begin with our basics of community engagement. Today I'm going to be drawing from Sylvia Choi's 2018 summary document, Community Engagement, a Foundational Practice of Community Change, which she compiled for the Tamarack Institute. I'll also be drawing from a few more sources and include the references at the end for anybody who would also like to explore this topic further. At its most basic element, community engagement is the process of involving community members in some form or some other of whatever it is that we're doing. Thinking about community engagement as a practice, it also emphasizes the need for a diversity of approaches to reach a diversity of people who will have great variability in their life experiences that will impact how and when they may be involved. Sylvia Choi offers a slightly different definition as she describes it as citizens engaged in inspired action as they work and learn together on behalf of their communities to create and realize bold visions for the future. This definition is rooted in an understanding of community engagement as a process of affecting community change. University administrators, in their pursuit of notable accomplishments to power them on to their next position, are also invested in making change, the forever sought after legacy, and so they would be wise to learn something from the process of community engagement. The reasons why we might pursue community engagement include its necessity for informing various planning processes, for gaining buy-in on various projects, to foster a sense of legitimacy for a plan, organization, or for a policy direction, or to build momentum for something by recruiting community participation. But what might surprise some is that it is not just the process of gaining support for decisions that have already been taken. For these reasons, we can assume that community engagement is an integral part of any community development practice. But of course, we can delve deeper than that. According to Choi, community engagement is foundational for community change efforts because of the role it plays in mobilizing the community. Crucially, this mobilization is not just a matter of pitching in to do the work, though that's also an important component. It's about mobilizing the intellectual capacity of the community. Drawing on Einstein's famous words that our problems cannot be solved by the same thinking that created them, Choi emphasizes how greater inclusion, bringing in a wider diversity of experiences, expands a group's understanding of a given problem, particularly when those who are most impacted by that problem are part of the discussion. And furthermore, when people are heard and feel validated, they are more likely to invest time and effort into an initiative. Lisa Adegail emphasized the value associated with the inclusion and participation of two particular roles in community engagement and change-making activities. First, we have the content experts, who we might consider the usual suspects around the table. These are the professionals, staff, or service providers, community leadership, and other people with the power to address the issue at hand by virtue of their offices. The other role is that of context experts. These are people who have lived experiences of the issues being investigated, and they may include people who are not often considered experts in anything, such as children and youth. Or in the context of a university, They would include the students, staff, and faculty. And the faculty not because they're experts in a particular discipline, but because they're among the context experts of the struggles faced by the principal function that universities serve, teaching and scholarship. The marginalization that many groups face, particularly young people in discussions of community scale decision making, can divorce action and planning from the insights that are obvious to those who experience an issue firsthand. And for all the status and privileges that professors hold, this is seldom true of how they're seen by administrators, who might perceive or portray faculty as obstacles to institutional change rather than catalysts of it. Now, the danger here in emphasizing the distinction between content and context expertise is to reify the boundaries between these categories of people, or in other words, to make something that isn't a firm distinction into a firm distinction. Someone who was at one time a recipient of Ontario Works may later in life go on to be an administrator or a case manager of Ontario Works, working for a band office or for the province. A neighborhood resident concerned about traffic calming might also be an urban planner in that community. An intravenous drug user may be or become an employee of a social service or harm reduction agency. The world is not so neatly divided between supposed professionals and lay people, or as we might see commonly in a university setting, between academia on the one hand and the community, or quote unquote, the real world on the other. There are many overlaps that we must bear in mind, particularly for those of us who have lived experiences of issues that are also transitioning into professional occupations or contexts related to that issue. Overemphasizing these distinctions may lead us to invalidate our own experience and to inadvertently absorb the discourses that privilege so-called expert knowledge over that of those with lived experience, or may lead us to compartmentalize aspects of our own personal histories, dividing our lives into before and after periods, and thereby shutting our minds off from the lessons that we may glean from our own pasts. There's many common mistakes and pitfalls that plague even earnest community engagement efforts. Among them is the tendency to only conduct engagement at the start of a process. This may be the result of a lack of understanding of the importance of potential for community engagement, or due to time or work constraints, or any number of other potential reasons. But the underlying approach is essentially that we engage at the beginning of the process to get a sense of what the community wants, and then we, whether we're professionals or staff or activists leading an initiative or university leadership, take things from there. This discounts the community's involvement in the initiative as an ongoing process and disenfranchises the community from being involved in decision-making when circumstances change and new directions or approaches are necessary. Similarly, for the community to be engaged only when those leading the engagement need something, whether it be buy-in or letters of support for a project or validation for the path being taken, this creates a one-way relationship that discourages participation. If community members are engaged for the benefit of those leading the engagement only, even if the initiative is ostensibly in the best interests of the community, we are essentially asking community members to do us a favor, and a favor that's never really returned. True engagement is reciprocal and involves a two-way relationship, not just of mutual benefit, but of mutual dialogue and decision-making. Community engagement can also be derailed by pressures of managerial efficiency. The need to meet deadlines, whether for grants and funding proposals or reports to clients, leadership, or to funders, can force us to rush community engagement. To see gaining input or seeking feedback as a formality or something that slows down our projects diminishes the quality of our engagements and discourages participation. Indeed, the biggest risk here is that we cease to be genuine in our desire for broad involvement and simply wish to get it done. Even initially well-executed community engagements can fall into the trap of failing to see it as an ongoing process that must be woven into the very nature and practice of the organization or group seeking to impact change. When we consider community engagement as a discrete step in a larger process, something that we can complete and then move on from to the next step, we fall back into our first pitfall of treating engagement as an introduction. Even if our vision of the process has a few engagements throughout the life of the project or the initiative, it will not be successful compared to if we have a genuine culture of engagement and shared responsibility between the so-called leaders or professionals and the community that is impacted. These pitfalls are contrasted by and can be counteracted with some of the wise practices that Choi and others have highlighted. Richard Harwood emphasizes the importance of people from diverse perspectives taking the time to learn from one another in community engagement processes, as this opens up the group to generating new solutions, which can also lead the group to be able to move more quickly later on. While this process of slow down and think together can make those of us more used to pressures of high stress environments uncomfortable or anxious, it's necessary for moving through the phases of group formation and of building trust. As Choi states, the core work of effective community engagement is to engage diverse partners in a learning journey um, so that they are able to transcend their individual good in favor of the common good. Now, innate to this approach is the need to be flexible. Organizers must concede that the project they initially conceptualized may change course or operate in ways that they did not originally envision. Ceding that degree of control can also be anxiety inducing, particularly in a world of project-based funding, where project managers may fear significant changes in their course might upset a funder. While many funders throughout Ontario have adapted to the best practices in community engagement and provide allowances for these changes in track, the Ontario government itself has frequently failed to adapt to this changing climate. And we need not look much farther than how it's handled the situation with Laurentian University to see a series of double standards in its application of this flexibility. Another method of avoiding such conflicts altogether is to engage the community before any grant proposals are written or before any projects are launched. This is another lesson that Laurentian's administration would have done well to learn early. Of course, this is easier said than done, but once a culture of engagement is established, it can inform future project development after the end of an initial project as well. Such an active and flexible approach to engagement not only leads to more effective and creative solutions to the issues trying to be addressed, but may also improve the social cohesion and functions of the community itself. Now, implicit up to now has been that community engagement is a long-term commitment, not merely a project or budget-defined activity. It requires us to invest resources, most important of which is time, to build these relationships. Shallow relationships of vague familiarity are frequently not enough to engender the kind of collaboration necessary for community change. And being unsure of your fellow participants' values, goals, or strengths, or the strengths of their commitment, may lead you to hold back on your own commitment as well. But when, through ongoing trials and efforts, we see the commitment of individuals persist, and especially if we have conflict, but work through that conflict rather than let it revoke our commitment, we begin to believe the genuine intentions of our fellow community members and cultivate a mutual investment that overrides our differences of opinion and perspective. It takes time to get to this point. However, we can see this occur from sharing many experiences. We might consider it the difference between an epic versus a novella. And what do all of these wise practices have in common? Fundamentally, it's all about trust. Trusting that others have insights that will contribute to our own understanding, trusting the community with the direction and shape of our initiatives, and relinquishing control, and taking the time to cultivate that trust through shared experience. And it's that trust that Laurentian's president, Robert Haché, Laurentian's Board of Governors, and the Minister of Training Colleges and Universities have all violated. And for that trust to be restored, these people should do the honorable thing and resign to make way for a new chapter that can begin to rebuild that trust. Yet there are further many barriers to participation and to the process of building trust that we must consider as community development practitioners. And we must consider this so that we can maximize the potential involvement of our respective communities. Many of the barriers that dissuade participation relate to the community members' awareness of the community engagement process. These include being unaware of the engagement or meetings taking place, not having enough notice to make plans to attend, or generally not understanding the purpose or utility of the engagements. Once individuals are aware and interested to participate, they may still face other barriers of access, such as meetings taking place at inconvenient times, competing obligations, no access to transportation or childcare, or other dimensions of inaccessibility for people with disabilities. Or there might be emergencies, like the pandemic we're living through now, that interrupt our plans for engagement processes. Still, just because someone knows of an engagement and is able to attend doesn't mean that they actually will. There are also many personal barriers to participation that are rooted in a lack of trust, which underscores the foundational necessity of long-term relationship building for successful community engagement. In addition to time, many of the interventions for building trust vary depending on the reasons for those community members withholding their trust in the first place. A jaded sense of defeatism or of being undervalued is best rectified both with a long-term demonstration of commitment as well as highlighting important changes or progress that has emerged from engagements, and by acknowledging, often publicly, the participation of those who feel undervalued. Addressing these barriers requires our own awareness of the diversity of experiences within our communities. There's no substitute for trust, there's no substitute for relationship building, and there's no substitute for the investment of time. And so to my colleagues at Laurentian, I know you've been let down, and there are thousands of us who see the disaster of neoliberal ignorance and self-interest and how that has destroyed the lives of thousands in Sudbury. We see you and we are committed to building a better world with you. And we join you in the call to stop the CCAA process immediately. It's not enough to prevent it from happening to the next university. We want to see action that will help the people in Sudbury now. We need to see a moratorium on the cuts and provide emergency funding to recall all cut faculty and to restore cut programs. We support the rights of Indigenous people and Francophones to determine their own educational futures, and we call on the provincial government to restore adequate levels of funding to post-secondary education. Thank you, miigwech, merci, and all the best to each of you.